gold trails and ghost towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barlee.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee, our storyteller today, and he's, well, as he is every day. But today we're going to take a look at the rush to gold in Alaska. Now, I thought this would be around 1900 or something, but it has its origins a lot earlier than that.
Yeah, it does. I think most people know that Alaska was purchased from the Russians by the United States government in 1867.
Seward's Folly.
Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox for $7.2 million, which was the best deal Seward or anyone else had ever made. The Russians thought it was a great deal for them. It wasn't. And so this is but a year before 1867. So in 1866, there was a crew going through, laying down a transcontinental telegraph line, which never came to fruition. That's true. And one of the guys working on that crew is a man called Daniel Libby. And Daniel Libby, when they're working across Alaska, and they're working in the summer, so there's not as much snow, and he pans a little creek up there, and he doesn't even give the name of the creek, but he recovers some fairly coarse gold, Mike. So he draws a crude map. That's 1866. So a few years later, things start to happen. Those gold rushes came north, as you know, from California, up through Washington, up through Oregon, up through Montana, into the Fraser River, up to the Caribou, up to the Amanika, up to the Dees, and so on. And so by 1880, prospectors are getting interested in American Alaska. And one of the prospectors is a guy called Joe Juneau. Juneau, Alaska is named after Joe Juneau. And he and his partner discover very coarse gold on Silver Bow Basin. But that isn't the only thing. The other thing that opens up Alaska, the gateway to Alaska, is really the Chilkoot Pass. The Indians on Chilkoot Pass want to retain their rights in that pass. They had retained their rights in that pass and let through very few people indeed. So the Americans have to convince them. They bring in a Gatling gun. And they put on a classic demonstration of a Gatling gun and what it can do. The ravage it can create and the terror it can create. The Indians get the message immediately. They open up. They open up the Chilkoot Pass. This opens up the Alaska.
All right. Fascinating story. We're going to continue our conversation about the gold in Nome right after these words. Welcome back to Gold Trails. So, a little demonstration of firepower pacifies the natives, and in 1880s, the Chilkoot Pass is now open to anybody who wants to travel it.
Yeah, the miners start straggling through, and of course they discover the Klondike, you know, the Yukon Gold Rush first. But Libby returns. He hears about the Yukon Gold Rush.
This is the guy in 1866 who drew the map.
He comes back 31 years later, 1897. Still has the original map, has 3 partners, backed by a group in the United States who actually staked them. And Mel Singh is one of the partners, Morden is another partner, and a guy called Blake, who plays a fairly prominent picture. And they come back in, and he follows his old map, and he goes back to the creek on the Nicolak River, actually a tributary above Godolphin Bay, and he finds the creek that he found in 1866. And it's a very rich creek. This is Ophir Creek, one of the great gold creeks of Alaska.
Got a good map and obviously a very good memory.
Sure, and all the creeks around are fairly good. Melsing Creek is a good creek, and a number of other creeks in the immediate area, so they're quite happy with it. But Blake has some Eskimo friends up there, and one is called Two Rig Luck, and Two Rig Luck kind of likes Blake. So he tells Blake that he's found gold, and he's found lode gold, that is gold in quartz. And Blake is very interested, but sitting close by is a Swedish missionary. And the Swedish missionary is a guy called Nels Hultberg. And he's a man of the cloth, but he's a little slippery, as time will prove. And that's unfortunate, but it's true. And he says
Nels.
He cuts himself in on the bargain. So they go with Two Rig Luck, and they travel through the snows. It's winter now, and Two Rig Luck is trying to get his bearings, and they go up a mountain, and there's some creeks down below. And Two Rig Luck looks around, and he says, Marnie, which means here in their language. They dig down through the snow and come across gold in quartz. So free gold right in quartz. He was right on the nose.
How would Two Rig Luck have any knowledge of this?
Well,
I mean, was it...
the Eskimos and the Indians knew that country like the back of their hand. Every mountain and every valley and every
We've seen
creek.
stuff like this somewhere else, and here I'll show it to you.
Sure. And so this is very interesting. They decide to pan the creeks down below. It's now late fall of 1897. And so they pan the creeks, and they come across pretty good color. In fact, very encouraging color. But it seems that the missionary, Hultberg, is discouraging Blake. We don't know what's going on in his mind. But so Blake doesn't stake it, nor does Hultberg stake it at that particular time. Then in the early part of the year, that's 1898, they go back in the other direction, towards Galofin Bay and Ophir Creek and so on. So they go back, then they run into a pugra, which is a storm off the Bering Sea that has no equal probably in North America. They were forced to crawl on their hands and knees for miles.
As a result of this storm,
they could not
Arctic
stand
storm.
upright. It was absolutely unbelievable. Couldn't see, couldn't stand against the storm. So eventually they come back and look around the Ophir Creek area. But Blake wants to go back to this little creek that he'd found originally. And there's some debate whether it was the right creek. I think it was. I think it was, on reading what Blake said. So he goes back with Hultberg again. And they go back with 3 Americans and 3 Swedes. And they go onto this creek, which we know as Anvil Creek. And Anvil Creek is a world beater. It is absolutely unbelievable. Nothing really approached it in all of Alaska. But the Swedes separate from the Americans. And some of these Swedish are actually, they were born in Sweden, but some of them were naturalized Americans as well. So they separate, and Hultberg goes off on his own. He disappears for several hours. Blake decides to look for him. Walks up the creek, sees Hultberg crouched over and panning feverishly. Hultberg notices him, jumps up, drops the pan and said, "Nothing here, nothing here." Blake believes him, which was a mistake. And Blake retraces his steps, and that's his first major error. And what happened, of course, is then our friend Hultberg goes and gets some other Lapp reindeer herdsmen, and one of these herdsmen...
Lapp reindeer herdsmen in Alaska?
That's right. The American government had pulled in a number of herds of reindeer to feed the Eskimos and Indians in that area because there was a famine in that particular area. So they brought in some Lapp reindeer herdsmen. One of these Lapp reindeer herdsmen is a guy called Japhet Lindberg. He's one of the Swedes. So the Swedes and the Lapps get together, and they decide that they will stake, because they discouraged Blake from staking it. They stake Anvil Creek really from the mouth as far up as the gold shows. They stake 90 claims in the creek, and that's virtually all the best ground on Anvil Creek.
They've done it.
Blake is incensed.
This is a shot of Japhet Lindberg panning that rich claim.
You bet.
Now, the guys in behind him, are they some of his other Lapp friends and stuff?
Yeah, these are people associates and individuals very interested in what he's doing.
Yeah.
And indeed, he's doing extremely well.
Now, there's also, I see these couple of guys, one of them standing there looks like he's holding a pipe. I think we get a chance to see that guy again later on, but maybe you disagree with me. But a couple of guys in Stetsons looking pretty interested.
Yeah.
Now, here's a shot. I guess this shows them working with what, rocker boxes on Anvil Creek?
Yeah.
Now, was that a successful little activity?
Spectacular. Some of these guys did extremely well. A guy named Price writes a letter to a friend of his, tells the friend to notify Blake. They're taking up to 20 ounces of coarse gold a day from each rocker. That's at least 10 ounces per yard, maybe as much as 20 ounces per yard, depending upon the ground. It is spectacular. Some of the nuggets, Mike, are this big. They're 15 pounds. They're 12 pounds. They're 11 pounds. And the word is not long in getting out.
I can imagine. This is not the kind of thing you can keep under your hat
of course not.
For too long.
Of course not.
Okay.
And Japhet Lindberg then comes into a small saloon owned by the famous Rex Beach, the Northern Saloon, which is starting in a little place on St. Michael's, a little camp away upriver. And he comes in, tall, blonde, good-looking, comes in from the Arctic cold, slaps a very heavy poke of gold, leather gold poke of coarse gold, and it spills out onto the counter. And he's got everybody's attention. He said, "I come from Nome, and there's more gold there like that." Well, the rush is on, Mike.
And I
rush
mean,
is on.
in all these cases, the word goes out. Too bad the telegraph wasn't in place, because I mean that would have helped to attract it. But the telegraph of other sorts goes out, and thousands begin to arrive.
Literally thousands. There were about 250 people in Nome in 99. By the summer, July of 1900, there were about 20,000. So almost 100 people for one the year before. And they're streaming into Nome from all over. They're coming from the United States, they're coming from the Yukon, they're coming from virtually everywhere. Nome is, at first, it's a tent city, essentially a tent city, and this is a makeshift town. That's right.
Can you imagine living in the north of the Arctic Circle in tents at any time of the year,
Yeah,
and there they are right down on the windswept beach?
They will undergo any privations to get at the gold.
And there they are.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, you've got, in order to get there, this may be one of the easiest gold rushes to get to, but look at the ship in the ice, just locked in the ice.
Locked in the ice floes. So you had some problems getting into Nome, and you had some problems getting out. There's no doubt about it at all, Mike.
Right.
But Nome is starting to come into its own.
Now, all of these guys, didn't you tell me that all 90 of the claims on Anvil Creek basically were tied up by Lindbergh?
Yeah, they were, and Ophir Creek was tied up, and Glacier Creek was tied up. So the old-timers had tied up most of the creeks. So the people flocking into Nome, they are very unhappy indeed. And so they're coming in, and one guy is actually quite ill, recovering from an illness, I think scurvy. And that's the story, and it's probably right. He goes down to try his hand at panning. So what's easier? There's water down on the beach. He goes down to the beach, scoops up some of the sand, fills the pan with water, pans it out, and he's a novice, but he isn't that much of a novice. He looks in the bottom, and there are golden flakes in the bottom. He takes it to a knowledgeable miner, and the miner says, that's gold. He can't believe it. It's on the beach gravels of Nome. This is the first beach, what they call the first beach, and they took millions of dollars off the first beach that first year.
Look at them standing there on the beach with, now any beach on the ocean, the tide's going to go in and out. What did they do? Run down when the tide was out and pan as much as they could?
Were able to pull their rockers back when the tide came up. And of course, it filled in the hole. They had to start all over again in certain areas. Had to watch their ground extremely closely. But very coarse gold, surprisingly coarse. And that was the first beach. Then there was the second beach, discovered miles back of Nome, and finally the third beach and Portland Bench.
Now they began substituting the word bench for beach.
Sometimes,
because as they took back from there.
Yeah, interchangeable.
All right.
But all very rich.
Going to take a break here, come back and show you what Nome looks like after they kind of get stuff sorted out. I'll do that after this break. Ghost Towns, Mike Roberts and Bill Barley, and we're talking about the gold rush in Nome, Alaska.
Yeah.
We already talked briefly about the tent city that was established.
Sure.
This is two great shots here.
It is.
Look at the tent city, and they've got barges up on the sand, and they're hauling what they need to build the town.
And it's 60 days apart. That's taken in July of 1900.
The tent city.
60 days. There's about 3,000 people in that city. That's all.
Yeah.
But by the time they take the second picture,
In September of 1900.
September the 15th, I think, of 1900, which is about 60 days later, there are 20,000 people, and it's a bona fide city.
Look, it's right down on the ocean. It's
Sure it
right
is.
down on the water.
Sure.
And I contemplate one of those Russian storms hurtling through at any time. It must have been a bitter town.
Oh yeah, it was a wide open town. I'll give you an example. There were a number of Yukoners. There are thousands of Yukoners, and one we talked about in another program, Goldie Golden. And he was a professional gambler. He went into Nome. He lost a big poker game at one time to Silent Sam Bonifield. He lost more in Nome. He lost $184,000 in a faro game in one night in Nome. That's equivalent, Mike, to $7 million in today's funds in one night. And he still survived and went on to gamble for another 20-odd years.
Goldie Golden?
Goldie Golden.
Good heavens.
Yeah.
Here's a shot with the Hunter. The Hunter, is that a hotel or a... so this is a beachy area. You can see from the stuff. Now, how do you get stuff ashore in a beachy area? Look at these boats are overturning.
That's right. That's one of the dreaded northers. They called it a norther, which is really kind of a pilgrim. but it's a norther, and it comes in off the Bering Sea and virtually destroys much in its path. And here's what happens here.
Look at that.
And these are
Schooner's
salvagers
overturned.
looking for things they can pick up.
And here's the wreck of the great Skookum on
That's
North
right.
Beach.
Yeah.
Look at, and it's all of the wood it was carrying is just thrash.
It carried everything. It carried champagne, it carried beer, it carried wood, and the salvagers, of course, headed for the kegs of beer and champagne and whiskey. And the town was drunk for about a week or so, actually. At least many people in the town
We
were.
need to have accidents like this more
That's
often.
right. There were
don't you?
1,000 people on board, evidently, and they were very, very lucky to escape. Nobody got killed in that, but the storms were absolutely devastating.
Again, where's the gold coming from? We showed you some
Well,
shallow diggings
sure.
with the rocker boxes, but this is
Yeah.
what Anvil Creek looks like
That's what
now.
Anvil Creek looks like.
Oh.
The diggings get deeper and deeper, and there's an army of workers working on that, and some of them high grading as they went along. Of course, the favorite method of high grading was to drop the coarse gold in their rubber boots. So some of these guys did that. Some did not. Some never did.
Even our friend Lindbergh, who had staked all 90 claims, I mean,
Yeah,
he got high graded
Yeah,
considerably.
He didn't stake all 90 claims, but the Swedes and the Lapps between them staked all 90 claims.
And did he become monstrously rich?
Yeah, he became so rich. I think this next photo tells us the story of how wealthy Lindbergh was and how lucky he was. He was originally a reindeer herder, came over virtually penniless, was befriended by Hultberg, landed on the best claim on Anvil Creek, and here he is, standing behind several dozen bars of gold, and these are huge bars of gold, and gives you an idea. This would be several $1 million at the time.
How many ounces
the
of
time.
gold are there, or how do you measure that much gold?
You can measure it by that mold you
God,
have there.
you
So
would-
that's. I'm sorry about that, Mike.
Would call attention to this. So this is a gold bar mold.
Yeah, and that's a standard gold bar mold. Some of them are made of different sizes and so on. That's true, Mike.
I'll
But
just
this is a
tip
standard
this up.
gold bar mold.
And it must
And it would
weigh
hold
50 pounds
That-
right here.
At least more than that, probably. But then it would measure 2,000 ounces of gold. You knew you had about. This is a Dory bar mold. You knew you had about 2,000 ounces of gold. So every one of those bars that Janet Lindbergh is standing behind is.
Well, that's tons
is
of gold he's standing
sure
in front
it is.
of.
Yeah, several tons of gold.
And it's all his.
All out of his own claim. That's his share.
And where is it going?
It's going to the U.S. Mint in San Francisco.
And he's getting coin of the realm back.
You bet he is. Yeah.
Let me put this down. Well, Mr. Lindbergh, is he just rich beyond his wildest dreams
Well,
and happy and successful? And
Not quite. Something happens here. There are a number of claim jumpers that come in with the various ships.
this must
And-
become the sport of the time.
Yeah, indeed it does. Much more so in Alaska than in the Yukon, where the laws were mining laws were much stricter. And they start
Maybe
jumping.
there were even policemen to
That's-
enforce them.
Yeah, that's right. And so they start jumping the claims left, right, and center. And the U.S. Army is not as effective as it should be. Lieutenant Spaulding is an individual in charge, and he unfortunately holds a number of claims, so it makes him less than a disinterested observer. And how he got those claims is questionable as well. But the U.S. Army does come down Main Street showing its strength on a number of different times.
Now, they were confiscating claims on the basis of nationality.
What happened was this. Two of the high graders, or the jumpers, went down to South Dakota, and they met a guy called Alexander Mackenzie, Canadian actually, one time. He was a politician, very high in the Republican...
No relation to Alexander Mackenzie
I don't know.
King or something like that.
I don't know whether he was or not. I can't comment on that. I do know he was very powerful in South Dakota. He had named every senator in South Dakota except one Democratic senator, which is interesting, and had a lot of lines into the Republican Party and into the president himself. So he decides that this is too good for individuals like Janet Lindbergh and Lane and various other of the gold kings of Alaska. He gets together with some politicians, and they decide to change the rules of the game. They send a new judge in there, a judge called Arthur Noyes, N-O-Y-E-S. And Arthur Noyes is far less than perfect. And he goes in, and he's about to do the bidding of Alexander Mackenzie, and he does just that. The result is that he actually forces these individuals to relinquish their own claims because they may have been foreign and they may not have been foreign, a number of different reasons, and they take over those claims. They're put in the hands of Mackenzie. Well, this just doesn't go well at all. So what happens, of course, is that they start complaining to a district judge in California. He overrules Noyes. In short, he overrules Noyes, and Noyes is removed from office. And he's given a little small fine and a few days. Actually, he's just removed as judge. He wasn't given anything in prison. Some of his underlings were. He leaves with $30,000 in gold they know of, by the way. And Mackenzie himself is arraigned before a court in California, in Oakland actually, and so much pressure is put on by the politicians that they plead that he's not going to survive the month. And so the president, who was McKinley at the time, excuses him, actually pardons him because of ill health. And the day he pardoned him for ill health, he was seen by reporters sprinting for the train to get out of Oakland, and he lived for another 20 years thereafter.
Well, was there anything left over after these people ripped these guys off?
Oh, yeah. Well, there was some gold had been depleted and taken out of the ground, Mike, but they were so incredibly rich that the gold flowed on for years after that.
You keep mentioning some of these great names,
Sure.
Goldie Goldham and others. Now,
Yeah.
Rex Beach was in
Rex
there?
Beach, I made a mistake there. Rex Beach was a writer who wrote the spoilers, actually. Tex Rickard was the individual who became the boxing impresario and had the Northern Saloon all through the North.
And it was his saloon that Lindbergh tossed the gold down.
That's right.
Correction now made.
Yep.
What's the spoilers about?
Well, the spoilers is about the high graders and the jumpers in Alaska. And the one who cured them, the guy who took over from Noyes, was a man called James Wickersham, and he was the ideal judge. Fair-minded, very even-handed, looked into it, knew mining very, very well indeed, Mike, and did a superb job. Went on to a marvelous career in Alaska for the rest of his life, really.
The way these towns grow and the way the speed with which a
Sure.
gold rush advances, I mean, there are people there and deals being made before there's any law around.
That's right.
And then the first law is usually about the worst law.
Yeah, it usually is, and that was what almost happened in Nome, but not quite.
So how long did this whole process last from start to wrap
Well,
up?
I would say you start from 1898 and go right to about 1910. Those are the high years. Then you start getting into deeper ground. You start getting into dredging and so on. Not quite as romantic, Mike.
Not and gold there anymore? There must still be gold
Oh,
on the
sure.
beaches. I mean,
Sure.
you can't possibly work all those diggings.
But probably not in paying quantities. Certainly not in paying quantities. Some of the creeks still pay. If you're a good placer man, you can work some of those old creeks, and third time around and still do fairly well.
Okay, got a couple of artifacts in the last minute. This is just a beautiful little collector's piece.
Sure.
The tin says Alaska
Yeah.
on it. That's obviously essential. And then when you open the little baby up, inside a pocket gold scales, 4-ounce maximum.
Yeah, very neat little scales.
Isn't that right? And that just fit in your pocket or backpack, and you're ready to make sure that you're not bilked out of your gold.
As long as you got a gold pan.
As long as you got a gold pan. And something else too, I guess this is the essential way, even today, of carrying your money.
Sure.
A little waist money belt.
Yep.
Look at that. That's,
And works like a charm. You could also, in a pinch, you could put gold in there, usually coins or bills. So.
yeah, and keep it close to your hide.
Yeah, where to sleep at night.
It was, how did it figure, do you think, in the annals of gold rushes? Was it greater than Klondike, greater than Caribou, greater
No.
than California?
It was greater than Caribou, certainly. The Klondike was not nearly as big as California. Well, the creeks were richer, but not as big.
Okay. That's our story today. Nome. See you next time on Gold Trails.